All right, welcome. Today, we're going to tackle a huge question, one that's been on people's minds for, well, forever. We're talking about life, death, and what happens after. And we're going to do it by diving into this incredible conversation from a classic Buddhist text. So here's the setup. A prince, a really sharp guy named Mahaushadha, goes to the Buddha with this absolute puzzle. He asks, how can consciousness, something you can't see or touch, actually carry the weight of everything we do and literally build our next body? It's an amazing question, right? It gets right to the heart of how the invisible shapes the visible. Let's get into it. Okay, so this first part is all about the prince's big question. And you got to understand, this wasn't just some casual curiosity for him. The text says he'd been wrestling with this for 500 lifetimes. Can you imagine? And he was still stuck on the nature of Shenshi, or what we'd call consciousness. He really, really needed an answer. So the Buddha agrees to help him out. And he starts by saying, look, this is deep stuff. He explains that only someone who's fully awakened can actually perceive consciousness directly. But, and this is the important part, that doesn't mean the rest of us can't understand how it works. The key, he says, is to use some really powerful analogies to help us get our heads around it. So, first things first, what is this consciousness we're talking about? How do you even begin to define something that's totally unseen? Well, the Buddha's approach here is brilliant. He doesn't start with a technical definition. Instead, he starts by explaining what it's like. And his first analogy is just perfect. He says to think of consciousness like an image reflected in water. You know it's there, right? You can see it clear as day. But try to reach out and grab it? You can't. It has no substance. It's totally real, but it's not a thing in the way we usually think of things. Or how about this one? Taste. You've got your tongue, you've got the food. Both are totally physical. But that experience of sweet or sour, that's completely formless. And this is where we get to the real heart of the prince's question, the big paradox. If consciousness is so subtle, so non-physical, then how in the world can it have such a massive impact on our very physical reality? Yeah, exactly. How can something with no substance control something as solid as a body? That's the real head-scratcher. And this is where the Buddha pulls out three absolutely brilliant examples to show how this works. First up, wind. Think about it. The wind has no shape, no form, you can't see it. But it can push over a giant tree, create massive waves. And in the text, he says it can even crush a mountain into dust. Its power is completely out of proportion to its substance. It's a force to be reckoned with. Okay, analogy number 2, a single drop of poison. Imagine a huge elephant. Now, a tiny, tiny drop of poison on an arrow, it gets into the bloodstream, and that minuscule amount can bring down the entire animal. Again, the effect is just massive compared to the physical cause. It's all about potency, not size. And for the third one, he talks about a banyan seed. These things are microscopic. Yet packed inside that tiny little speck is the entire blueprint for a massive, sprawling tree with thousands of branches. So what's the big takeaway from these three examples? It's that being subtle or formless doesn't mean you're weak. Consciousness is like that wind, that poison, that seed. Its power is just immense. All right, so now that we've established that consciousness is subtle but super powerful, let's talk about how it works. This is the next big piece of the puzzle, karma. If you think of consciousness as the engine, then karma, that's the blueprint. It's what tells the engine where to go and what to build. So karma is basically the collection of all our actions, and those actions leave an imprint on our consciousness. They literally shape it. And the Buddha uses this really wild metaphor to explain it. He says it's almost like our consciousness gets possessed by the quality of our actions, whether they're good or bad. And you can see how this works right here. On one side, you have good karma. This is like your consciousness being guided by, as the text puts it, a celestial spirit. It naturally seeks out what's pure, beautiful, and peaceful. But on the other side, with bad karma, it's like being possessed by a lowly ghost. It's drawn to filth, decay, and suffering. And this possession, this inclination, is what sets the stage for everything that follows. Okay, so we've got the two key pieces, the powerful, formless consciousness and the karmic blueprint that guides it. So what happens next? Well, now the Buddha gets into the nitty-gritty of the journey itself, the actual process of how consciousness leaves one life and finds the next. And it turns out there are two very different paths. So let's look at the first path, the virtuous one. For someone whose consciousness is full of good karma, the moment of death is actually peaceful, even joyful. They see visions of beautiful palaces, of divine beings. They're filled with this feeling of happiness. The text describes the transition as being as simple as a rider getting off one horse and hopping onto another. Just effortless. But for someone with a negative karma, it is the exact opposite. And I mean, the contrast is just brutal. The text is very graphic here. It says they see messengers of death coming for them with ropes, literally dragging them into darkness and hell. It's an experience of absolute terror and pain. Now, the prince is listening to all this, and he asks a really smart, logical question. He says, okay, but wait, what if the consciousness is attached to its old body? Why can't it just go back in? It's a great question, right? And the Buddha's answer is just so simple and perfect. The Buddha just asks him, if you cut your hair, can you put it back on your head and make it grow again? And of course the answer is no. Once the body's life force is gone, it's like that cut hair. The connection is broken, it's no longer a viable home. Consciousness has to move on. All right, let's pull all these threads together. This is where we get the complete picture of this formless architect. So here's the bottom line, the core principle that finally answers the prince's question. Consciousness is the architect. It's formless, but it has the power to build. But what does it build? Well, that's where karma comes in. Karma is the blueprint. It's a set of instructions that consciousness uses to construct our new reality, our next body, our next life. And the Buddha leaves us with one last amazing analogy to lock this all in. Think about making a fire by rubbing two sticks together. The fire isn't inside the wood, right? You can't just break the wood open and find fire. But you also can't get fire without the wood and the action of rubbing them together. It's the same with the body. The body isn't hiding inside consciousness, but it can only arise when you have consciousness, driven by karma, coming together with the right conditions. So let's just quickly recap the key takeaways here. First, consciousness is formless, but it's incredibly powerful. Second, karma is the blueprint that gives that power direction. Third, what we do, our actions, directly shapes how we experience the transition at death. And finally, a new body isn't some pre-made thing. It's constructed, brand new, from this interaction between our consciousness and our karmic history. And all of this brings us to one final, really powerful question. A question that takes this ancient teaching and puts it squarely in our laps, right here, right now. If our consciousness is the architect and our karma is the blueprint, what kind of future are we building for ourselves today?